All right. Hello, hello. We're live. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. We have a very exciting topic to discuss, and we have a brand new guest joining us for the first time. Our Chief Revenue Officer here at Loveland Technologies, Steve Stotzenbach. Hi, welcome.
Hi, Sana.
Hi, Steve.
Glad to be here. Great topic.
Great topic that Steve has been living and breathing for how many years now, Steve? Property data and land use and everything.
So, yes, I would say probably 10 years now around the subject of property data, land records, and turning that into useful commercial products for a wide range of vertical markets and a wide range of use cases.
Wow. So that's like a cue to all of our attendees. Keep your questions ready. There's nobody better to answer questions on property information, property landscape, and our topic for today, land use, better than Steve. So yeah, with that said, I'm going to jump right in. Most of you joining us probably might already know me or have seen me on one of these before, but Sahana Murthy here. I am the Chief Product Officer here at Loveland. I manage our product strategy and marketing and actually oversaw and helped our team. Not really, this was really our team's engineering work for almost a year and a half. So the nationwide standardized land use codes that we announced and launched last month was a labor of love for a little over a year of an incredible data team that we have in-house. We did a small little POC in 2019. It worked. We were not sure how far we would get, but we wanted to give it a go. And we did a private beta with all of our data customers last year to get more feedback and QC and help inform our decisions better. But we reached a point where it had reached a really good level of coverage, and we wanted to make it available to everyone. And we generally made it available last month, but really it was hard work of a very lean product team, a very lean data team, and about a little over a year worth of work is what we're going to discuss today. So jumping right in, I'm hoping you can all see my screen and a deck that is shared here. So quick run through of the agenda. Land use codes is it's a very interesting topic in general. So we want to cover a lot of ground. So we're going to talk about land use codes, why they're valuable, what use cases make sense for land use codes, what we have done at Loveland, and how that is different from maybe what is out there, and how that could be possibly helpful to more people who want to use this and work with our data. So that's kind of the overall agenda. Please keep your questions coming. You can type in your questions into the chat window. We'll also have some time at the end to answer questions, but keep them coming along and we'll try and get as many of them as possible. And a lot of members from our team are actually on the chat right now, so they can also help answer some of this.
So we'll hit them up to be part of the answers, okay?
All right, let's get started. So, all right. So what are land use codes, Steve?
Sure. So understanding what is going on a property today is desired by many folks in many roles in many vertical industries. What is going on a property, a set of properties, or across a metro or a region of properties? Probably the most common understanding of land use as a code or a classification system or an assignment to a property comes from the fact that your county tax assessor or your appraisal district in Texas, or so I'll use tax assessor, but they have different titles, different places. Their statutes, their training, their processes have the determination of tax due at the individual property is based off of what is going on that property, what the use of that land is today. So generally, when we're thinking about land use codes, it is a categorization that is assigned during that act of determining tax by assessor, appraiser, et cetera.
And today is the key word there, right? What is happening on a particular piece of land today?
Today, because it's this year's tax bills that need to be generated and such. So that is yes, and land use is a snapshot in time. Now, certainly a lot of land, that use is consistent and constant across years or decades, but the representation of land use is as of this point in time.
All right. So let's jump into why they're valuable. So I think the key thing that we want to address here in general is, I think land use provides that extra additional context about property information that straight out of the bag parcel data doesn't. It helps enable research and investigation, for different types of use cases. For instance, site selection. They may want to know, more about the land use and acreage, and they may have multiple, parameters that they want to probably gauge and judge before making informed decisions. But I think really what we want to drive home here is point number 2, which is, I think truly the value here is in standardizing the solution, because much like the parcel data that we deal with, and if those of you are here right now live with us, and if you worked with public data, you know that every county treats and does its data differently. And similarly, with over 3,000 counties, the use code information, use description, every county does it differently. There isn't one universal standardized solution to it. And for people who generally work with data at scale, few geographies to few states to maybe nationwide, working with that kind of disparate, data set with different coding by every county is a mammoth task in itself. And an effort to standardize this data point at a nationwide level is truly where it is valuable.
So true, Sahana. I think the understanding what's going on a property is done by probably 80% of our economy out there. So many industries, obviously every layer of government, local, state, federal, jurisdictional units and such, finance and insurance, real estate and development, energy, utilities that service properties, all have an interest in understanding what is going on a property and what that might mean to the decisioning they're on. Now, if your framework for making a decision is you do all your work in a very tight geography, you are hunting for development opportunities in just Harris County, Texas. In our data, in our parcel data, you have a coding for each and every property in Harris County, Texas. It is what the appraisal district for Harris County assigns to that property. And if you're operating in just that small geography, you're going to become very attuned to that coding system, what it means, what it means as far as your assessment of that property and where to go find additional research. But when your project, your initiative, your objective gets broader, think about an interest in finding industrial land across all of the Atlanta metro area for putting up renewable energy projects under our infrastructure initiatives that are coming. Atlanta covers 18 different counties. So what you are challenged by is 18 different classification systems from 18 different county assessors. And the task of understanding those coding systems is daunting and difficult. Thus, the need to have a standardized view, that allows you to work your project across broad geographies and understand using a standardized coding system says industrial here means the same as industrial here as it does over here across an entire metro, an entire state, a set of states, or the entire country.
Right. So, that's predominantly why they're valuable. Is it provides the additional context. It helps with innumerable types of use cases, different projects, different solutions. In general, I think when you're working with data at scale and property data, I think knowing what the data can be used, knowing how the data is owned, these are all primary data points for almost anybody across all verticals. And standardizing them is just as important as standardizing any other data set. We went about doing that with parcel data first. Once we did that, we realized it was important to get to the next set of standardization, which is the other complementary data sets, which would be useful to most of our customers at scale. So I think that makes the perfect segue into talking about our land use codes and why we did it. It was exactly all the things that we just discussed in the previous slide. We don't always get these data points from counties too. Like, it's sparsely populated. We heavily depend on three main data points, which is use code, use description, and zoning description. And they don't always come from most counties, and zoning especially is very sparsely populated. And this was a huge need. People and our customers communicated to us constantly that they would like to work with land use code at a nationwide level. And we went about, trying to figure out how we would do it. It was important to add that additional context to property data. It was important to standardize it at a nationwide level. But one other roadblock that we ran into was looking at some other commonly used standards similar to land use, like NAICS and SIC, and they all turned out to be single dimensional. But when you're working with data that doesn't always come populated with all the attributes that you need, we wanted to kind of see if there were solutions that could help with multiple layers, that could help provide context at a multidimensional level. And that's kind of where we got started with our search, and we discovered and started working with the APA's LBCS standards as the guideline. And that's kind of what we have used as our guideline to populate these fields. The LBCS stands for Land-Based Classification Standards. This was developed by the American Planning Association. I have the link right here. I will share this deck right after as well. They worked together with 6 other federal agencies to help develop and kind of build this standard. And they officially launched this in 2000. But this was actually an updated version of the original manual that was made in 1965. It was called the Standard Land Use Coding Manual. There isn't any difference between the 1965 version to what was eventually launched in 2000, but a lot of research work went into it between 95 and 96 to 2000 to kind of make sure that this was actually the right kind of standard for classifying land use. And one of the key things that we really resonated with, and that's kind of why we were drawn to this and we ended up using it as our guideline, was the fact that they wanted to classify land use into multiple dimensions so that you can create additional layers of context. And where you have missing gaps, you can use some other dimension to help inform those missing gaps. One of the key examples I'll give you is when I was reading up on LBCS, they actually mentioned that one of the dimensions, and we'll talk about dimensions in a little bit, was site, as in what's on the land, was something that could not be categorized or classified just based on activity and function. Say, for instance, a park has, it's a complex combination of different types of activities can happen on a park, different functions can happen, different kind of structures can happen on a park. So it was important to recognize that land isn't linear and parcel isn't linear, so it cannot be one-dimensional. Hence the need for multiple dimensions and the additional nuance and context in classifying land use. So
to kind of, Sana, just to kind of bridge this. So as we set about creating our national parcel database, and as we aggregate that data from these 3,000 plus sources around the country, at individual properties, we were seeing identifiers about property, classifications about individual properties. And our customers started saying, how do we understand that classification system? What does that mean? And our previous answer was always, well, we're carrying what the county says. So if you really want to understand what that means, you're going to kind of have to go do that research into what a 3013 code means in DeKalb County, Georgia versus DeKalb County, Illinois. And that was placing a lot of responsibility on our customers to go find yet other data sources to figure this out. So we arrived at the idea of implementing standardizing land use so that you could work in these broader geographic bounds and have things mean the same thing across that greater expanse. But we weren't in a position to go define our own coding system.
Yeah,
that's not our role. So we turn to the experts. It would be my representation of what we did here, and the APA, of course, are property planning experts.
They are. And they actually built this in conjunction with 6 federal agencies. So it's actually a very well designed, very well thought through classification system. So we did a tiny little POC. It seemed to work. And we wanted to first start off with the 2 main dimensions and then build on it. And that's kind of what we've done. Before we actually go into the details of these dimensions, I do want to add one little trivia bit here. Is recently when we talked to APA, they actually told us that we might actually be the first practical adoption and application of this classification standards because we applied it and it's being used in a live data set today. So it was kind of nice to see and nice to hear. After a year and a half of hard work.
Good.
All right. So the LBCS standards, it's kind of divided into 5 main dimensions, out of which the first 2 are really very closely related to land use. First one being activity, which basically describes what the piece of land or what actual activity happens on a particular parcel by observable characteristics. So it could be farming, it could be shopping, restaurant type activity. I have some other examples here. So it is based on what actually occurs on a parcel, office type activity. But what does the office belong to? That is what the function dimension would answer. So function actually describes the broader economic use of the parcel. So what type of establishment are we talking about? So they're sort of very closely related. They can be very confusing when we first start working with these codes, but you need the 2 of them a lot of times to make sense of the parcel's land use. So an easier example would be function would be agriculture, and then activity would be farming or tilling. So it kind of goes one level deeper. But then it could also be something as simple as activity could be a parking lot, but then the function could be in totally different code in a different category for a school or a university if it's a school parking lot. So you kind of need the two to kind of help make sense. In many cases, you will see the two of them might be under the same subcategory. So they could be like residential, and so different 1,000-level codes. But in many cases, they won't be. But the two of them together really do help build that extra context. Moving on to the third one, structure, just as the name says, what type of building, what type of structure. To kind of populate this, we need more specific use code information, which may not always happen at a county level or in the county data, but wherever we do, we try and include as closest as we can a code for this. So it kind of talks about multi-unit buildings. It actually has different codes for how many number of units there are. Like there's a different code for 3-unit buildings to 11-unit buildings. So it actually helps inform other attributes in the data set, like number of units. Site is, it basically describes what is on the land. Is it developed or not based on physical characteristics of the land. So usually really helpful for state and national parks, or any sort of undeveloped site if it's a vacant land. So that's a really good description for land use. And ownership, actually, this is kind of a unique dimension because it's APA's way of connecting land use to land rights. So how land can be used based on ownership so here we mainly focus on private property or publicly owned, whether it's locally owned, state, federal lands, tribal lands, and the works. So together with these 5, it's just adding so many different layers to land use, and it kind of provides the additional context and the nuance that one would be looking for when you're working with land use than something that is more single dimensional and says industrial versus commercial versus residential.
Right. There are other approaches to standardized land use out there in the property records business. And they are very much one-dimensional. While they may have classifications that try to get more granular, they often end up being, is it residential? Is it commercial? Is it industrial? Is it vacant? Is it ag? Is it public? And our approach here with this standard is really giving a lot more insight into what's going on a given property across these dimensions.
All right, so since we talked about dimensions, if you're wondering what these dimensions actually look like, what these codes look like, I have a little screenshot here. There's a link below to a page on our site where you can actually see the entire, the keys that we've used. They usually range from 1,000 level to 9,000 level. And each of these dimensions will have the category and then the subcategories, as you see here. And if you notice the numbers, the level of specificity goes up with every digit that gets added to the code. And that's kind of the hierarchy. So if you see here, a 3,000 activity code basically says the overarching umbrella under which it falls. So industrial, manufacturing, and the works. And then 3,100 goes a little bit deeper and says plant, factory, and heavy goods. And then 3,120 talks about goods storage. It is still industrial, it is still plant related, but then just kind of goes one level deeper in terms of specificity. All right. Anything to add here before I show some examples, Steve?
No, let's show the examples, and then I do think we want to circle back on a discussion around land use, relationship to zoning, and you already mentioned NAICS codes and things like that. So I think there's let's have some time to kind of put those things in relationship to each other for
sure.
our audience.
For sure, yeah. We have some dedicated time for that. So I have a couple of examples here. This is not the full property universe, but just picked a few just so we can see what these codes look like in action. What you see here is a screenshot from our mapping platform. I do want to quickly add that our LandGrid mapping platform is a great way to kind of check out some of these things and visualize this data. If you have a couple addresses in mind, which are different types of properties, just find those addresses, make sure we have coverage for that. But on the parcel view, you should be able to see the codes attached to them. It's a great way of kind of seeing how these codes work, because even though we have description everywhere, a lot of times, codes are just codes. So kind of seeing them in action kind of puts them in context and perspective. So what you see here is a shopping mall in Florida. And this is what one would call a commercial property. And we have the different level of coding for it based on the LBCS system. So activity would be a goods-oriented shopping. And then function would say it's a department store or a superstore. And then site, as it clearly shows, is a developed site with buildings. And then structure, it's a department store building. So the structure doesn't just say building, it actually says a little bit more than that, department store building. So that's a good example of a shopping complex. Parking lot is usually a very unique example because it is attached to multiple functions. Almost every sort of establishment has some sort of a parking lot attached to it. So you'll see that the activity is 5210, but then function could be anything. So for what I have here, I couldn't come up with a proper function because it could be an apartment complex parking lot, in which case it would be under the 1000 level codes. If it's a business parking lot, it would be under 2000. If it's a school parking lot, it would be 6100. And then site, it's a developed site, but it doesn't have any structures on it. And then for structure, it is a 5200 automobile parking facility. So that's how nuanced these codes are. It kind of gets as granular as it can be. A lot of this depends on the level of data and the quality of data we get from the public sources in the first place. But then the codes in itself in the LBCS guideline are quite granular. And the last one, things that we have not been to a lot lately, restaurants and cafeterias. So the activity could be 2000. So you see that there is restaurant type, and then there's restaurant type activity with drive-through. But then function is where it gets really, really granular. It could be, it even shows if you have a bar license or not, which is why I think that today, like, currency of this information is important, because anybody can lose a bar license overnight. So this is kind of how you can actually get to that level of granularity, irrespective of the parcel or the establishment. I did want to jump in here to talk about how our customers use these codes, but I think there's more to discuss on this when we talk about use cases. But when we spend the past year working with our customers, getting feedback, QCing the data, in fact, our customers help point out discrepancies where some of the codes didn't match what was on the property. We went back, corrected a lot of that. We allocate some time quarterly to kind of go back and QC this data further. At the crux of it, it's important to understand that a lot of this is a lot of human manual work, going parcel by parcel, code by code, making sure that we make the most informed decision and populate the right code for different parcels. But our customers use it for a varied set of use cases. Sometimes, here our customer at Pivot said that they kind of use it as an alternative when they're working directly with county data and then they have missing data. They kind of use this to inform the other data sets that they work with. But then we also have customers who use this for site selection, for just overall understanding of industrial versus commercial versus residential. That's usually the most popular use case. But we have actually found that even when our customers start out with not actually having a specific use case for land use, the minute they actually find these columns, they actually find them so useful that they end up using it in all of their use cases. At least that's been the feedback that we've received from some of our customers. That's just how fundamental some of these fields are, in addition to just parcel boundaries. And yes, so this is what Steve, you mentioned earlier is, I think this slide talks about the key differences and basically helps us understand how land use is different from so many other things that people often confuse land use with, you know. Let's start with the first one.
Yeah.
Zoning comes up a lot, and I think it's used interchangeably too, a lot of times.
Certainly in plenty of client conversations and clients in their own conversations, a lot of this vocabulary is used somewhat interchangeably. And of course, if everyone understands what they're specifically talking, they're all fine. But there are differences, and I think it does help to illuminate these differences. Certainly, plenty of our clients' use cases that can take advantage of our land use classification perhaps also need further information that we're talking about here. So so interchangeable use of zoning and land use, I think, at times can become problematic because they are different.
Mm.
They're a little different even in where the information starts and where it percolates up. Let's go back to that most common understanding of a land use classification for the purposes of taxing by the taxing authority, the appraisal district, or the assessor, county assessors and such. And their purview is county-wide. Now, zoning is hyperlocal. So a zoning classification system is each jurisdiction, each town, each municipality. So in a given county, zoning is differing from one jurisdiction, one city, from Minneapolis to St. Paul. The zoning classification system is different, and it means different things, and it serves and such. So the other thing about zoning is where it differs from land use is zoning is an indicator of somewhat of an indicator of what can happen on that property. Land use is what it is today. Zoning is an indicator of what can happen. Oh, there can be a structure of 30,000 square feet or 3 stories, or can get to, can the structure can go to 5 feet from the property boundary edge, or can have these types of activities in it or not. So zoning is valuable. Zoning is hyper local, its own form of classification, often different from one to the other, with lots of descriptors about what, narratives and about what a zoning classification means. So land use is what it is. Zoning is is a directional of what it can be, somewhat in that concept of highest and best use of a property. You can't just go hunt for industrial properties and say, I'm going to make these all multifamily. Local jurisdictional zoning. So you can hunt for industrial properties using our land use classification. Can you put multifamily on those industrial properties is controlled by the local jurisdiction and the zoning.
Right. But it can, we've often noticed that it helps inform land use, even though it's not a substitute, but it does help inform as we work through, missing land use coverage data.
Zoning says this is zoned for single family, is an indicator that the properties in that location are single family residential property. So yes, it can, and we've used it to inform our classification. I tend to think the workflows go, you have this understanding of the land use today, and if you're really interested in using that property to build multifamily, to convert from one use to another, to house the homeless, to become transit adjacent, all the things that people look to do with property, you head from land use into zoning and into the very specific jurisdictional understanding of zoning for each individual property that's in your hunt and in your project list.
But there isn't just like we've struggled with land use, but there are some examples of land use standardization. There isn't one known solution for zoning as of yet.
So having been in this property data business, I've seen many a use case where people have asked for, especially when they get familiar with standardized land use. Well, how about standardized zoning? That doesn't exist out there. And I think it doesn't exist because the costs and complexities to it are daunting. Your sources of information are now in the tens of thousands. The complexity of what does an R3-1 or an R3-4 mean 10,000 times over when it means different things make the idea of standardized zoning. I mean, it's certainly as you talk as owning product and such, we talk about what can we do for our customers around zoning. I guess I would temper the idea that we're going to immediately jump into standardizing zoning because the work that went into land use classification. My worldview is that it's 5 times, 10 times that for standardized land use. And you get into an interesting balance of all you'd have to invest in it to what you can do with it as a commercial company as we are.
Yeah, I can hear my team screaming, saying, no, don't even. So, all right, the second one, this also comes up a lot. The difference between
land use is not business classification. Mm-hmm. There's correlation between these, and there's plenty of customers' use cases that will have them working with multiple classification systems. I think the easiest way to understand this is we all go visit a doctor in a medical complex. So our land use classification would clearly identify this parcel as a medical complex. Mm. And your 5 tiers of classification would detail that out any further. But we all know as we enter that that property that has that building of doctors in it, that what you have in there is you have 40, 50 different businesses. You have the pharmacy and the coffee shop. You have the imaging center and then the individual, and those are all businesses. So NAICS, NAICS, and SIC are business classifications. So each business in there, the Quest Diagnostic Lab has a business classification. It's in this property, which our land use says is a medical complex. So from understanding the property, if you want to know the tenants and what they're up to and their role, and that goes into, do they have equipment in their facility? Like, there's a lot of reasons to understand business classification, but I hope that example of a medical office, we deem it a medical office complex in land use, but that inside there are 30 businesses and they each have a business classification from the SIC or the NAICS NAICS classification.
Yeah. So this is also a case of where I think it can be used to help inform, but it can't be a substitute. It focuses on businesses, so it can't describe land use. It can't describe residential at all, which is again a big part of land use. And I think even government and public use, because I think it won't be able to distinguish between if it's a business, it's a business. So it will have the nonprofits and the government and the public sector out of it in their classification too. All right, so the third one, use cases. This is interesting, and there are so many, but what in your sense are like the most compelling, where land use is like an absolute must-have?
I think it's when a customer has again, it goes back to that broad geographic purview. If you're a utility with an operating territory, to be able to profile the properties that your electricity or gas or broadband cable or fiber services, to understand the land use of the property and to be able to understand that in that broad context. Now, our operating territory is the entire state of Washington. I think certainly when you get into real estate and development use cases, that urban infill has many brokers and investors and developers looking for one type of property. Take an old industrial site that's now being surrounded by residential or commercial growth and seeing that as a development opportunity. Finding those one by one are great, but with standardized land use, you could be looking across all of Washington, D.C. and looking for industrial sites adjacent to freeways with new residential developments near it, and literally come up with a set of target properties through which you start doing the deep drill into which ones meet your next criteria down. So there is a lot of land use a lot of use of land use classification in real estate for development and growth opportunities.
True. What about for utilities and renewables?
You take I think the concept of utilities, one interesting thing about the utility industry is they've had to learn a lot more about the customers they serve and structure programs and rate programs and energy saving initiatives by type of customer and by type of property. So I think even though they have territory by which they service all properties, they just have this deep need to understand ever more the properties they serve and what's going on the properties and what that means. I think the renewables industry, which is certainly poised for tremendous growth as we invest in infrastructure and climate resiliency and such. We have clients in the renewables that are looking for agricultural land use because a solar farm or a wind farm can coexist with agriculture or be a higher value use. And we have customers that are about targeting commercial and industrial properties for commercial grade solar for the benefit of the operations that are on that site. So with all the growth in renewables, the hunt for land that meets the specific criteria of each customer and what they're after, this is that path by which they can say, how many commercial roof opportunities do we have if we were to enter the Phoenix market with our solar offering?
Yeah, and because you brought up agriculture, I do want to mention that when we went about populating these fields for land use, yes, we do rely on use code and use description, and in some cases, zoning information. Those are the primary data sources and data points for this. But we've also used a range of attributes within our schema to help inform this further. It's like a combination of derivative fields that we've built, a combination of complementary data points and data sets that we've appended, whether it's the USPS residential indicator, or crop data layers and federal lands data, things like that. So we've used a bunch of this to inform, because you do need different layers of data points to kind of obtain or at least be sure of the code that you're assigning to a parcel. And then in ownership, for LBC's ownership, we did use owner name information as well. All right, so moving on, limitations and coverage. So as is the case with all data is not perfect, there are some limitations. Coverage especially, we do rely on significant coverage of these primary fields, the use codes and use description. And as we are all aware, those are not always provided everywhere. So that causes certain gaps in coverage. But what we did, and this is what we did even with our parcel data, is we made sure that the top 50 cities and the metros, like we went after those first and made sure that we had high coverage there, and then we continue to build on top of it. So there are gaps, but we are working on it. But it's upwards of 80% for all of the top metros. So it's actually not bad coverage at all. Limitations, I don't know if they're exactly limitations, but there are certain things that it's a natural trade-off between data that isn't normalized and data that is normalized. So data that you get directly from counties tend to be a bit more specific, and the specificity sometimes reduces when you standardize. So it becomes more general. So, like for instance, AG1, AG2 zoning codes would all come under farming in land use. So there are some of those trade-offs that happen that you will see in land use classification. Apart from that, I don't really see things that feel like limitations here. You might find that for certain parcels, we may not have all the 5 dimensions. We may be able to provide the 2 main, activity and function. We try to make sure that activity and function are the first ones we get to, but it always depends on the quality of data that we get from the county sources themselves. And
I think the other thing, Sahana, on that, I would say is, especially for our customers who have been with us for a bit, they've seen our continued investment in overcoming limitations and expanding coverage in our core parcel database business. I mean, we just got up to over 3,000, all the way to 3,016 counties in our nationwide coverage map, and continue to press that forward. Now that we have commercially released, now that you deemed this commercially viable, we're invested in it. So we're going to keep looking for data sources and processing methods and insights and inputs that allow us to dial this land use classification in ever more accurately, ever more completely over time.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, and the last one is the single versus multi. I think we talked about this earlier too, but what sets us apart from the NAICS and SIC is those 5 dimensions that we talked about. But Steve, do you have any insight on what else is around that is comparable to standardized land use codes, and if they're all single dimensional?
They are, and they tend to, I've seen them. I've seen customers use some other methods. One of the other challenges, they all seem to be a pretty old classification system.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of dig on that, and it kind of goes back to when was this classification developed? Why was it developed? And what I've seen in those other classification systems is that they're not thorough enough. And for instance, the where I always see them come up short is, every major development in an urban core today is a mixed use complex.
Mm-hmm.
There's retail and restaurants. There's condos and hotel in the tower. So, and those older classification systems that I think they started back in the 70s. All they had done is they've just kind of been extended out to try to cover these, and so then their disciplines about their classification start to kind of fall apart. So I think the single dimension ones, they're a bit dated. They don't accurately capture what's going on property, especially today's growth. All the stuff that's happened since the 2008 recession has got new characteristics to it, and I think the 5 dimensions of this APA standard allow us to dial in that accuracy and on that understanding of what is this, how do you characterize this property today?
Yeah. Actually that is, it doesn't cover for modern structures, and we don't know what else is out there. Like, we don't know what the future holds and how much more different it'll be from what we have today. So I think having more dimensions will allow for that extra information. It does say all things.
And I think that, based on the APA standard, right? So we have our role in implementing that, but we don't have to try to extend that classification system. That's their role. It's their system. We've implemented it. So there will be more industry expertise on how that system grows to accomplish change, and then we'll be an implementer of it and try to drive for accuracy in that implementation.
Yeah, that makes sense. And they have been updating, since they first launched in 2000, they've made updates over the years. There will be a few more to come eventually. Am I missing anything else that we should probably discuss when we talk about land use? I think we touched upon most things.
One thing that comes to mind for our clients, our implementation of standardized land use, recognize that what we bring you in your record set, whether you get bulk files from us, whether you hit us in our API and consume individual properties as part of an application, those local jurisdictional classification codes, the native land use and the native zoning classification, they remain in our record.
Mm-hmm.
They've informed our standardized classification. So these are additional fields in our data set. And really, I bring that up because the use case is you can work with the standardized fields, and then when you're honing in on property, you're going to want to start digging in on the specifics, and the specifics remain in our database. The local assessor code and the local zoning code are in our record layout. This is an additional set of fields that are the standardization.
Yes. And in some cases, we may actually have data populated for some of these fields, even when we have some of the primary fields missing, because, like, for instance, LBCS ownership and things like that. So it is always a perk. It's like the extra set of fields that one is getting, and which is why they're part of our premium data package. So this is how you can get it if you don't already use our parcel data or any of our products. Our standardized land use codes are a part of our parcel product suite. So if you are the premium product suite, sorry. So if anybody using LandGrid Pro and above, or any of our API premium packages or our bulk data in the premium package, will be able to get the land use codes, in addition to some of our other premium fields, which include the USPS vacancy and residential indicators, and building footprints count and square footage. So yeah, it's a quick, easy way to just email us. We're one email away, and we can get you started with a code and a data sample. And in the meantime, you can check out all of these fields, everything that we have in our schema, and all the premium fields on the Langrid mapping platform, and see how they work for your geographies. And let us know if you see anything that you have questions about. We're always looking forward to getting feedback on not just these codes that we discussed, but all the other attributes, because between updates, things change. But usually what we have found is parcel data doesn't change as much, like the boundaries don't change as much. A few other things might change along the way, and we update the data frequently to keep to stay abreast with all those changes. In case anyone is wondering of some of these screenshots that I have in these slides that talk about private ownership, public ownership, I'll add a link to this deck later, but we did a very interesting project that was an application of the standardized land use codes, which was data analysis of parcels and properties along the US-Mexico border. And we use these land use codes to help with our data analysis. And there's a beautiful report that was put together by our teammates. Nick and Matthew, shout out. But they did a fabulous job. They spent 3 months working on this. And there's a beautiful interactive map that you can take a look at. It shows the entire border and land along.
I was just about to prompt you to describe what is on that background, because it is a very compelling application, very timely.
Very timely, yes. So that was our little bit about the land use codes. Like I said, we had a lot of ground to cover, and this is generally a very large topic too. So I think we did an okay job covering everything. So if you have any questions, please let us know. Type in right now, but I believe there are a couple questions that we could get started with. Do you have the actual physical address for all the parcels? Yes, we do. So we do have, it's called as the situs address. It is part of our schema, and it's one of the primary fields in our data set. And one with highest coverage as well. And how should we let you know about the land use codes that we come across that are incorrect? Absolutely, please let us know. That's the only way we've been continuing to ground truth some of these codes when there isn't enough specificity from the data that we get from counties. So please email us at parcels@landgrid.com or team@landgrid.com, and our product team will take it from there. Oh, Nick is here. For anyone curious, Nick just dropped the link to the border project. Thank you, Nick. Are there any other questions? Please continue to type them in. We'd love to answer them. But if you're unable to get to them today, the same 2 email addresses hold. So team@landgrid.com, or if it's specifically data related, parcels@landgrid.com. So while we wait for questions, Steve, we usually end some of these webcasts with some fun banter about what we've been binge watching. What have you been binge watching lately?
Binge watching, well.
Or watching. I don't know if we have
last
time.
Night, I hung out on Godfather 2 again last night, such that my wife came through the room and said, "You're watching that again?"
It's a classic. Yeah. Do you know how many times you've watched it?
Easily a
double
dozen.
digits. For sure.
Oh, yeah. You?
What am I?
What's your binge?
I keep going back to Schitt's Creek from time to time. I'm I'm so upset
Oh,
that they stopped it. It was one of my favorite shows all time.
such tight 25 minutes of just ironic humor. They're awesome.
I actually wondered why it took so long for that show to become so popular. I remember watching the pilot and going, this show is going to be spectacular. And it took a while to get caught on, but definitely a favorite. All right.
I'm a
Any
little
other
bit older, so Eugene Levy goes back to Toronto and SCTV days for first time I've crossed paths with Eugene Levy.
questions?
So he's awesome.
He's awesome. And that show was just so good at pioneering so many things, and just creating a storyline for every character. Every character is memorable, even if they just show up for 2 minutes.
Hmm.
um, any other questions? I do want to. I remember instead of typing, I could have just had this slide on. I typed the email address earlier, but I do have that information right here. If there are no other questions, I think we can wrap it up. Like I said, we are a super approachable team. Just email us. We are always looking forward to hearing from our customers and just general feedback. Even if it's something that isn't working, everything goes into product roadmap for improvements. So please keep us informed, and yeah, let us know if you are interested in testing these land use codes, and we'll get you a sample as well. Any final thoughts, Steve?
Love to hear the use cases, the user stories, the successes with this, and we're invested in it. We'll keep making it better.
For sure. All right, Steve, this was a lot of fun. Let's schedule one again for next month. We'll come up with a good topic to cover. Property landscape has so many things that needs probably an hour's discussion. So we'll get one going. Thank you again for taking the time to talk to me about all of this fun stuff today. And thank you all for joining us live. Appreciate it. I will be in touch with the deck and any other links to our land use codes for additional information. All right. Thank you all.
Savannah.
Take care. Stay safe. Get vaccinated. Talk to you all soon. Bye.